Today's lesson is all about something called vivid verbs. Verbs are things that people do. They are actions. They can also be a word that describes being, but most times we're talking about action words or things that we do. When you first begin learning a new language, English in particular, usually boring words are the first verbs that you know or the first words that you learn. Those are the most common. They're the words we hear all the time. But once you know those words, it's time to move up to the next level. And instead of having boring words that don't necessarily show you exactly what you want to say, you need to use those vivid verbs or those words that are very clear, that say exactly what you mean. In this case, exactly what someone's doing. Let's take a look at a few examples of what I mean by this. Here's a word that's very common, the word said. He said this, she said this, we said this. Said is used so many times, especially in books that you read and when you hear people talking. But if I want to know how someone said something, I can use clearer words. I can use vivid verbs to describe that. Did they whisper it? Did they yell it? Maybe they had to explain it so you understand. Maybe someone cried out, like shouted it out. Maybe you're just talking and chatting about it. Maybe someone asked a question and you had to answer it. Or maybe someone called out to you. Here's another word that is very common, get. You might have to get something. You might think, did someone get it? You might say, oh, I hope I get that. Get is used very often. So how do I use a vivid or clearer word? Well, instead of just going to get something, I might say I'm going to grab it. Or I'm going to get it, I'm going to bring it, like take it with me. I might say that I can catch it, like I get the ball, I catch the ball. I might say the dog's going to get the bone. He's going to go retrieve it, like go after it to get something to bring it back. You might say you're going to return it. So you might have had it, but now you're going to give it back or hand it back. You might say something like, I got some points or I got some prizes. Well, what did you do? You were really earning those because you were working hard in order to receive them. You might go to the store to get something. Well, what are you doing? You're buying it or you're purchasing it. Or you might say get, like understand it, like, oh, I got it. I understand it. That's another word for get. It's a clearer word. I get a better picture in my mind. I have a better picture in my mind. That's a vivid verb. Here's a boring word, the word went. Instead of using the word went, I went here, she went there, we went here. Let's try some different words. I might say someone ran. I might say they walked. Maybe they're skipping. Maybe they're jumping. Maybe they're leaping over something. Maybe they're even cartwheeling over something. That's when you put your hands on the bottom, your feet up on the top and do a flip. Drove, like the word drive, but in the past. And rode, like the word ride, but also in the past. Those are some common boring words and some words that you can use to replace them or to use instead that are not so boring. Now, let me show you some other words that have to do with animals or adaptations. Here are some vivid verbs. These are not boring at all. I might say the animal squirts something out. So maybe the water comes and it hits you, it's going to squirt you. Instead of saying something's flying, I might say something's fluttering or something's soaring in the sky. Instead of saying running fast like a little animal, I might say that animal is scampering. Instead of running when it's a larger animal, I might say galloping. Instead of eating, I could say whether it eats a little bit at a time, nibbles, or if it's eating a lot at a time, just shoving that food in, devours. Those are all vivid verbs. I know exactly what you're talking about when you use those. Here's some more. These are words that you might hear with pets. You might have to bring them something so they have it. If you're bringing something for them, you're providing for them. You're giving them exactly what they need. In Spanish, you say proveer. You might say that you have to feed them. Groom them is when you are cleaning them and taking care of their hair or their fur. That's grooming them, maybe brushing them. You might have to trim their fur or trim their claws or their nails. That's another way you care for a pet. You also might have to entertain them, like do something so that they are having fun and that you have their attention. Those are some ways you can make vivid pictures with what you are describing something as you're describing what they do, instead of boring ones that aren't clear and don't really show us what you're talking about.